My dear sisters and brothers, I want to tell you a story. This is my story. However, the times are such that there may not be much of a division between your story and mine. My story could happen to you tomorrow. Your story may happen to me next week. Today we find ourselves bound together by breath, by fate as slight as the accidental touch of a hand. We in this country who have always been contained by the ocean, we are now held by a common fear, our differences leveled by a fate that might indiscriminately impact any one of us. I recently suffered a fairly bad attack of COVID-19, where I was hospitalized and on oxygen for 8 days. I am now recovering, but like many of you, I wake up each morning dreading news of another death or hospitalization of someone I know. So I'd like to take this time to share with you what I learned about the virus and what the virus taught me about myself. After going through COVID, I understand clearly that there is so much more that we can do to help ourselves face this crisis. There is more strength available to us. There is more healing available to us. There is more common sense we can draw from. In other words, there need not be such pain, such fear, or even so much death. But enough of the preamble. Let me start by explaining to you what happens to a person when they suddenly contract COVID. Firstly, there is the shock. Now, this is because we all have this basic survival instinct that refuses to succumb to the probability that the misfortune that is overwhelming everything around us will actually turn itself upon us. Even in the most dire circumstances, we are unable to let go of the hope that we might indeed be the exception. So not one of us believes we will be hit badly by COVID until we are. So when we are, it is a shock. Now this is the very first place we can begin to address the power of this virus over us. If we can move from disbelief that the virus will hit us to acceptance that it eventually will, even this small change in our minds will help us be better prepared for COVID. COVID positive. Two such pretty sounding words actually, no? But what havoc they wreak. Understand this. The weight of this virus lies in not what it does to your body. The real weight of this virus lies in what it does to your mind. There was an interesting moment in my own experience. I was really quite ill. I had a very high fever, my body felt very weak, but it was still possible that I didn't have COVID. Now the difference between that moment and the next, which is when I had that positive PCR test in my hand, is what I want to draw your attention to. For in those few seconds, I didn't actually become any sicker, but I instantly felt much more wretched. And this is because of the weight of COVID. Now where lies this weight? It lies in the deep stigmatization of the virus that has taken place in this country, which has turned it into something vastly heavier, more destructive and more demonic than what it really is. And let us never forget what it is. It is an easily contractable disease that has the potential to fatally harm human beings whose immune systems are somewhat compromised, either through age or underlying health issues. Now this is COVID's blueprint. If it has become anything more to us, that is a manufactured weight added on to the virus by humans. But the good news is that we can rid ourselves of this added weight. And my friends, we must. You know, when I was on oxygen in hospital, I had a lot of time to contemplate the tremendous misfortune of the people of this country. That when faced with one of the greatest challenges of our times, we would come under a leadership of such immaturity, incompetence, and corruption. When sensible, kind, humble leadership could have saved us lives and so much grief, we find ourselves trapped with selfish, irresponsible people who have stooped to demonizing and exploiting a health issue and have succeeded in paralyzing the country. You know, I do not wish to waste any more words on them other than to say, I reject their intentions as human beings. I reject their capacity to lead this country. There is much work to be done, much that needs to be undone. And we, the people of this country, need to come together to do this in spite of those who try to mislead us. So what has the COVID virus become to us? In the past 2 years, when we should have been dealing with this virus primarily as a medical challenge, we have allowed it to morph into a number of other things, which have generated their own momentum, created their own havoc, and have fed this virus fat until it threatens to crush us all with a paralyzing lunacy of fear. In Sri Lanka, this virus has been made into a weapon. It has become a weapon of political victimization, of racism, public shame, harassment, arbitrary punishment, even a weapon of constitutional corruption. A weapon that has proved to be very successful in stoking mass confusion, paranoia, and terror amongst our citizens. People are shamed for contracting it, people are victimized for contracting it, people are stripped of their rights when they contract it, people are torn from their homes, buried without dignity when they contract it. Our Muslim brothers and sisters are afraid of losing their souls to COVID. Pause for a moment and imagine the weight of that. You see, it's very important for us to separate the actual weight of the virus from the manufactured weight of the virus. Because it is only then that we begin to see the true challenge we face and not the imagined one that we are staggering under. The false weight of this virus is a crucial point of intervention because the COVID patient essentially struggles with all of this extra weight unnecessarily. COVID patients are not just battling the physical impact of the virus on their body, they are being suffocated by the fear, the guilt, the shame, blame, confusion, paranoia. These things give the virus a bloated, devilish power over us and cripple our ability to resist it. So often, the battle against COVID is lost even before it is started. Now we have to start talking about this. After having recovered from COVID, it is my opinion that a patient needs 3 things to effectively fight this virus. They need timely intervention, only if it is required. They need the continuous support of community, and they need to not be afraid of the virus. Now, Sri Lanka's entire response has been focused on providing only the first of these 3 things, which is the clinical medical help. However, the other 2 things, the community support and the reducing of fear, are severely compromised. And so we are not actually providing our COVID patients with the best chances of survival or recovery. Now I like to return to my own story to illustrate this point to you. So, now we left me at the point where I had received that dreaded COVID positive result. Instantly, you find yourself transported to a parallel world. The advice starts to pour in. The numbers, the opinions, the questions, the theories, the medication. Everyone is trying to help and the noise is endless. There are the people closest to you. Beyond that is an ocean of friends, acquaintances, relatives. Beyond that, the medical professionals. Beyond that, public opinion, government advice, health requirements, PHI protocols, media updates. It all gets very complicated very quickly. It's like moving out of your bedroom where you were being quietly sick all by yourself onto a public operating theatre where you are strapped down under harsh floodlights and surrounded by this babble of voices. Everyone is looking at you and no one is touching you. The illness you feel within your body is no longer a personal matter. It is now a site of public debate and spectacle. So as the virus grows mysteriously within you, as the opinions on what you should do, must do, are required to do become deafening, as your physical isolation extends itself into a wall, two things happen. You disconnect with your own body and you disconnect with the people around you. Now this is a scary place to be, and remember, the patient is sick. So they are dealing with all of this at a time when their body and their mind are weak. During this time, the patient begins to surrender more and more control of their situation. For instance, all the little rituals that I had been doing to keep myself connected to the thread of my own recovery began to slip away. Little by little, in a body that is growing weaker, in a mind that is growing more afraid, you sit by yourself with your thoughts, with no one touching you, and your life is decided by those further and further away from you. I realized at this time that the strangeness of COVID is that it is at one and the same time the most personal and the most public of traumas. While mankind has gone through pandemics before, we have never faced such mandated personal isolation within the context of such deafening global noise. This polarized experience, the avalanche of opinion amidst the lack of human contact, the continuous noise within the unending isolation, this is a very disconcerting and utterly exhausting thing to experience when one is ill. It is vitally important that we understand this particular psychological state of the patient, because this mental fatigue and surrender of control greatly impedes resistance to a virus that is now gaining traction over the body. In other words, if patients are overwhelmed and paralyzed with fear and confusion, they are already feeding the virus. Now let us never forget the battle site that this virus is fought over, the battle site of breath. It is our breathing that is affected by the virus, and it is our breathing that is affected by fear. When we make ourselves afraid, we compromise our breathing, which is already under attack by the virus. Now, because of this very direct connection, to be afraid is essentially to feed COVID. I remember the moment I was told I would be taken away to hospital. By this time, I was feeling I could no longer do anything to save myself. I had a fever of 103. I could hear the noise of my own breath, and I was desperate for the comforting touch of a human hand. When the ambulance came for me, I had been 6 days in a room all by myself. I had forgotten the effort it took to climb a step or to pick up a bag of clothes. As I made my way through the house that I loved, saying goodbye to my family that stood 8 feet away from me, I felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. I remembered I cried when the siren of the ambulance came on. You see, I'd always wanted to travel in the back of an ambulance, but I always thought there would be one other person there with me who I could smile triumphantly with. The madness and the brutality of social media has made sure that we have all become utterly desensitized to awful pictures and videos of people being whisked away by medical teams, thrown into rooms, dying by themselves, being bundled up and discarded afterwards. The overconsumption of these images have deadened our empathy and our understanding of how incredibly difficult these moments actually are on a patient and their family. When a COVID patient is removed from their home surroundings and taken away from all that they know, what plays in their mind, quite simply because it is playing on loop everywhere, is that they may never see their loved ones again, that they will die alone. In their weakened state, patients are unable to sift their own reality from what they have been watching on social media. Hospitals are intimidating, daunting places. With their bewildering physical structures, their confusing subcultures, the entangled bureaucracy, the unending crises. Now, these are difficult sites to navigate by oneself, even when one is in good health. This is why a patient has always entered hospital with a companion, someone who can help mediate the experience, who watches over their progress, speaks with the doctors, questions the nurses, reports back home. With COVID and the isolation that is insisted on, all of this is stripped away completely. The patient, in her weakened, frightened state, navigates all of this by herself. So I was put in a room. And then over the next few days, people in full PPE outfits hurried in, hurried out. They put fluids into me, they took blood out of me, hooked me up to machines, pumped me with oxygen, scanned me, monitored me. But they rarely spoke to me or looked at me. And with each passing moment, I felt more and more disorientated, more frightened and helpless. Now, there was definitely competence amongst my carers. It was clear they knew what they were doing. However, the staff would not linger in the room a second longer than was necessary. The goggles or the visors they were wearing robbed me of seeing their eyes, and on top of that, they all looked exactly the same in their full blue overalls, masks, gloves, visors, aprons. I could not even tell the men from the women. Struggling now to breathe, I was paralyzed sometimes with the fear that these strange, blue, silent people whose faces I had not even seen will now be taking decisions about my life. Those first few days in hospital were truly terrible. Alone in the room, having to do everything for myself, with no one to speak to. What was I to ask the doctors when they came in? I didn't have the questions. I didn't even have the confidence. I could not remember if I had been there 2 or 3 days or when I had slept. I continued to have a fever of 103, and by this time I was hallucinating. The fog in my brain meant that I could not understand things clearly. What had the doctor just told me? Why was my fever not coming down? Why were they injecting me with steroids? What day was it? These were dark times, and there were a few moments when I thought I actually might die, not of the virus, but of fear or loneliness. And then, on the second night, something happened. An exhausted looking nurse came into the room, and as she was leaving, she switched off the light and she said, "Hari Patiyo, Buddha Saranai." Now she didn't even look at me, and she was gone before I had turned towards her. But that one word made me weep, for after so many lonely days, I felt touched by a human gesture of kindness and solidarity. It was at this point that I decided I was not going to give in to the fear, and I was also not going to give up on human connection, because I realized that to face this, I needed both. I needed to not be afraid, and I needed to feel connected to the humans around me. And so I started writing down clues about the faceless blue people who visited me. There was the nurse with the impossibly tiny hands, and the other one with the leopard-patterned spectacle frames. There was the attendant who wore his phone in his rubber glove, and the young male nurse who had decorated his visor with a shiny strip of purple wrapping paper. There was the ward doctor who blinked fiercely, and the cleaner whose PPE overall always dragged on the floor. Every time someone entered that room, I forced them to speak to me. I asked them about how uncomfortable they were in their blue suits when they had seen their families, what they thought of the politicization of the medical system in the country, their personal opinion on the pandemic. I told them things about myself, my children, my plays. I asked them if they were afraid to touch me. I explained how important human contact was to a patient. I thanked them every time they lingered longer, ventured closer. Little by little, they all became my friends. My list of clues grew and grew, and they still all looked the same. The men, the women, the older people, the younger people, but now I could tell them apart. Correspondingly, they too began to stay behind, to chat. They made jokes. They touched my hand. They told me I looked better. They admitted they were worried about their children. They confided that they were exhausted and sweating in their awful PPE kits. When all else failed, we just sat down and cursed the country's politicians together. When I left the hospital, my list of medical personnel who had visited me in my room was 26, and I was so very proud of myself that I had managed to identify them all. What is relevant to this reflection is that it was during this time that I began to relax. During this time that I began to breathe more easily, and I felt that I began to heal. The next thing I decided to do was to take ownership over my own recovery. Now, when I was isolated at home, I had my ritual that I followed. With hospitalization and the helplessness I had experienced, I had abandoned all that. I started it again. Now, I was very weak and had been warned against any kind of exertion, but instinctively I knew this was the right decision. I began to sit up every morning and do my pranayama. I started to steam daily. I massaged my legs and my hands. I dragged myself out of bed every afternoon and had a hot shower, with the oxygen mask on, mind you. I then sat on that tiny hospital balcony in the sun. I made myself kottamali every evening before I went to sleep, and whenever I could, I taught myself how to breathe again. For I realized I had forgotten how to breathe. My body, because of the recent stress, had switched to shallow chest breathing, which I knew was the breathing of human beings in panic mode. I was so surprised at how knotted up and contracted my body was when I actually paid attention to it. It took me a long time and several attempts to coax it to relax and breathe again from the diaphragm. During this time, I slowly began to feel my body returning to me, and with it, a sense that this was my life, my journey, and that I had agency over what was happening to me. It was at this point that I was able to connect in a meaningful manner to the wider web of human prayer and resilience that was upholding me. Ever since I had fallen sick, I had been assured of the thoughts, good wishes, and prayers of people who knew and loved me. However, in my initial dark days in the hospital, I had lost a connection to the tremendous strength that can be derived from this. It was when my fear finally evaporated that I was able to access this subliminal level of healing, which no one really understands, but anyone who has been very sick can testify to. This final connection to the focused prayers and good wishes of my community provided the most subtle level of healing of all. From this point onwards, though the isolation continued, I did not feel disconnected with other humans. The ones that visited me now communicated with me, and the ones who could not visit me, I was finally open enough to communicate with. I had now finally regained what I had lost when I first heard I had contracted COVID. I felt a deep awareness of my body, a sense of control, of determination over my own recovery, and a connection to the healing power of a caring community. I had moved from a place of fear to a place of control, and where I felt the change most keenly was in my breath. I would like to end this reflection by pulling together some of the lessons that I learned through this experience. COVID thrives on fear. Countering the disease entails countering the fear psychosis within us and amongst us. Firstly, we all need to make a personal commitment not to spread fear and confusion to others. We need to cut through the noise, educate ourselves responsibly, work on our own physical and immune resistance levels, and strengthen our mental, emotional, and spiritual capacity to deal with the continuing challenge of this situation. Secondly, we need to provide all personnel in our medical sector with the highest level of physical and psychological support. If these individuals are uncomfortable, if they are exhausted, overworked, worried about their families, or if they are paranoid, they will not be able to care for our sick. So we need to prioritize their needs so that they, in turn, can rise to the sacred responsibility of their profession, which is to care, truly care for their patients. And we should hold our doctors and nurses to the sacredness of this responsibility as well, for it is what they chose when they chose this profession, a profession that calls for kindness and courage in a crisis. Finally, as a people, we need to actively counter the culture of fear and conflict that is being stoked and spread through this country by those who make us weaker and more foolish than we are. We need to reach out to each other, trusting in our human capacity to heal ourselves and each other through the power of our collective confidence. And we need to do this without fear. An important part of not being afraid is being well prepared. We need to prepare ourselves and our families to deal with this crisis. We can do this by strengthening the rituals that bind us together. If we are a praying family, we should pray together. If we are a sporty family, we should play together. If we are a cooking family, we should cook and eat together. For every time we feel connected to something that binds us, we are strengthened to deal with the disruption that may come. Sri Lankans tend to shy away from speaking about difficult things. But in an environment where everything could change so very fast, we need to sit down and we need to talk. We need to sit together as families and talk about sickness and death and our beliefs after death. We need to talk to our children about what could happen. We need to talk to our parents about the choices open to them. We need to talk through our differences. We need to forgive each other, put matters of our house in order. This will make us less afraid of the unknown, because we will have an understanding with the people that we love. This kind of understanding brings great peace when a crisis strikes. Conversations have already been had, kindness has already been felt, and love has already been proven. In this time of physical isolation and paranoia, people who live together should also touch each other as much as possible. My dear friends, our children are growing up afraid of human touch. Our elderly are growing old, pining for human touch. We cannot allow a virus to rob human beings of something that has sustained us through our entire existence. Physical human touch brings us healing and growth and mental strength. It grounds us in our own bodies and connects us to our community. If it is being compromised in one domain, we need to consciously strengthen it in another, so we don't lose value for it altogether. It cannot be replaced. We also must, as much as possible, resist the isolation that is imposed on patients. There are many people now who are fully vaccinated, who are in a position to accompany patients, to care for them. We need not be so paranoid about touching people if we have our masks on, if we are mindful. A kind, confident human being who is willing to come forward with help is a tremendous source of strength to someone who is struggling by themselves against fear and death. Now there continues to be the ugly and completely unnecessary sensationalization of COVID deaths. Death is painful and parting is sacred. It is our duty to provide those mourning and those who have passed the gift of dignity and respect. Hospitals should by now have developed sensitive, competent ways in which to handle the procedures around the passing of a COVID patient. There is no need to transport COVID deaths from hospitals to cemeteries in screeching patrols of ambulances every day. There is no urgency in death. There is only urgency in keeping people alive. Once a person has passed, all science proves that the virus also dies. The final rites of the person can be done with dignity, kindness, and care. One of the most interesting things about COVID is that in spite of all the masking, it seems to have the power to strip away the facades people hide behind. Over the past 2 years, COVID has laid bare the very souls of people. And some of these souls have been vibrant. And some of these souls have been utterly vile. We have literally seen people for who they are. Cowards, brutes, fools, saints, warriors, thieves, comrades. Communities of people, nations too, have revealed different essences of themselves, as everyone has faced the same problem differently. Now, Sri Lanka is world renowned for its friendly, hospitable, kind people. Our smiles, our hearts, our generosity, our qualities that we have been sought after for throughout time. If we have been known for these qualities, they must surely exist within us. So I cannot think why, when faced with a crisis, they would not emerge to define the essence of our response. So if there was any way we could delve deep into ourselves and access these reserves of resistance, if it were these qualities and not this crippling fear psychosis that formed our primary response to this virus, I truly believe we would not be fighting this battle, teetering on a back foot like we are now. I've come to the end of my talk. my dear sisters and brothers. May the several gods that we worship in this tiny island help us find our way back to ourselves as we look for a way out of this crisis. I thank you for your time.